under the soft glow of the stage lights, the hall was filled with quiet chatter and the rustle of programs in people's hands. The evening had already seen a handful of young performers, dressed neatly in shining shoes and crisp clothes. Each walked with confidence, eager to show off their skill. Then, as the announcer called her name, a different figure stepped onto the stage. She was not young nor polished in her appearance. Her dress was plain, her hair tied back simply, and her shoes, worn from years of use, tapped lightly against the wooden floor as she made her way to the piano. The audience reacted before she even touched the instrument. A few soft laughs rose from the back rows, not cruel but dismissive, as if the crowd had already judged her ability just by looking at her. Some whispered to each other, leaning close with amused expressions. Others glanced around as if asking silently, "Who let her in?" The recital was supposed to be a showcase of promising talents, shining stars of tomorrow, and here was this woman, who looked like she belonged in a quiet kitchen or a small neighborhood shop, not on a grand stage beneath bright lights. She felt every pair of eyes watching her. The weight of their doubt pressed against her back as she adjusted the bench. For a moment, her hands shook slightly, and she folded them in her lap, breathing deeply to steady herself. The laughter stung, though she kept her eyes forward, pretending not to hear. It wasn't the first time people underestimated her, and in a way it would not be the last. Still, in this moment, the sting was sharp. Her journey to this stage had been anything but ordinary. It had taken courage just to step forward when her name was called. In the hallway behind the curtain, she had felt her heart racing, her palms damp with nervous sweat. She had told herself, "Just walk, one step after another. Don't think about them, think about the keys." And yet, as she made her slow entrance, the audience's reaction almost crushed the fragile wall of courage she had built. There is something about laughter that can wound deeper than words. A child might have found the giggles harmless, but for her, each chuckle carried years of being overlooked, ignored, and judged. They were laughing at her before they had even given her a chance. They did not see her long nights practicing alone, her tired hands pressing the same notes again and again after long days of work. They saw only a woman who seemed out of place. She sat down carefully, adjusting the height of the bench with small, deliberate movements. Her face was calm, but inside her chest a storm raged. Should she stand up and leave, save herself from further embarrassment, or should she risk it all, pour her heart out, and let the music speak louder than the laughter? Her eyes fell on the piano keys, shining under the stage lights like rows of waiting voices. The announcer had already stepped aside. Leaving her alone with the instrument and the doubtful crowd, she placed her hands just above the keys. Not touching them yet, the room grew quieter. Though a ripple of amusement still hung in the air, it felt as if time had slowed, stretching the seconds painfully long. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, reminding herself of the years that had led to this moment. She remembered the nights when she practiced silently on a table because she had no piano, tracing the keys in the air with her fingers. She remembered the moments when she almost gave up, when life pulled her in every direction except toward her dream. And now finally here she was, an unlikely figure in the spotlight, laughed at before she began. The audience did not know her story. They saw only what was in front of them, a plain woman who did not match their image of talent. But the truth was waiting beneath her fingertips. Every note she had learned, every tear she had shed, every sacrifice she had made, all of it had built up to this single chance. The stage lights burned brighter. The silence stretched further. She closed her eyes for a brief second, blocking out the faces, the whispers, the dismissive chuckles in that darkness behind her eyelids. There was only her and the music she had carried inside for so long. She breathed deeply, ready to let it out, and as she sat there, the audience had no idea that the same woman they laughed at would soon hold them all in quiet awe. They didn't know that the sound of her playing would reach into their hearts, pulling at feelings they hadn't expected. For now, all they saw was someone they believed would fail. All she saw was the piano, the one friend that had never judged her, never laughed, never turned away. Her entrance may have been met with doubt and laughter, but what came next would change the room forever. For most of her life she had lived quietly, never drawing attention to herself. The world around her moved fast, with people chasing dreams, building careers, and seeking recognition. But she remained in the background. Her neighbors knew her as the polite woman who always greeted them with a soft smile. Her co-workers thought of her as dependable, never late, never loud, never demanding. But what nobody knew was that inside her heart lived a secret world of music. Since childhood, music had been her safest place. When she was sad, she would hum quietly to herself. Letting melodies calm her when she was happy, she would tap her fingers on the table as if it were a piano, creating rhythms no one else noticed, but life had a way of silencing her gift. Her family needed her, responsibilities piled up, and the dream of being a musician became something she only visited late at night when the world slept. Her small apartment carried the weight of those hidden dreams. There was no grand piano in her living room, only a second-hand keyboard with a few broken keys. She had bought it years ago, saving every spare coin until she could finally bring it home. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers many nights. After finishing long hours of work, she would sit at that keyboard, close her eyes and let her fingers move. The sound was uneven sometimes, the missing notes like scars on a melody, but to her it was enough. She never spoke about her music to anyone. People around her wouldn't have understood. To them, she was just ordinary, someone who blended into the crowd. They didn't see the way her soul came alive when she touched the keys. They didn't see how the music kept her spirit from breaking during hard times. It was her hidden strength, her private treasure as a child. She had once begged her parents for piano lessons. Her father had shaken his head, explaining that lessons were too expensive. Her mother had told her to focus on studies instead, promising her that music could be just a hobby. And so, with no teacher, she learned on her own, copying melodies she heard on the radio, practicing on borrowed instruments whenever she had the chance. When her friends outgrew childish hobbies, she stayed with hers, finding comfort in notes and chords. But as she grew older, reality demanded more from her. Bills needed to be paid, her younger siblings needed her help, and eventually her parents grew frail. She worked jobs that drained her energy, sometimes standing for hours behind a counter, sometimes cleaning offices when the rest of the city slept. Music became her secret companion during those lonely hours. She would hum softly while wiping tables, or imagine entire concertos while waiting for the bus in the rain. Sometimes she wondered if life had been unfair to her. She saw others her age living the lives she had dreamed of, traveling, performing, becoming someone. But whenever jealousy tried to creep in, she reminded herself that she still had something precious. Her music was still with her. It might not have been on a big stage, but in her heart the songs lived strong. There were nights when she sat by her window, listening to the city outside, the cars, the voices, the distant laughter, and then she would turn back to her keyboard, pressing the keys with gentle patience. The melodies she played were not perfect, but they were filled with honesty. Each mistake, each pause carried the truth of her life. It wasn't about showing off, it was about surviving another day with hope. Her neighbors sometimes heard faint notes through the walls. They might have thought it was background noise, but for her those sounds were lifelines. They carried her through loneliness, through disappointment, through the quiet ache of unfulfilled dreams. The music reminded her that she was more than her job, more than her struggles. She was still the girl who once believed she could fill a room with song. As the years passed, she accepted her role in life. She never expected an audience, never imagined applause. All she wanted was a few minutes each day where she could be free, where the world could not laugh at her or judge her. In those moments, it was just her and the piano, a secret friendship stronger than any bond she had with people. And yet, no matter how much she tried to keep it hidden, music had shaped her in ways she didn't even notice. It gave her patience when life tested her. It gave her strength when she was tired. It gave her comfort when she felt invisible. Without it, she would have been lost long ago. So while the world saw a quiet, ordinary woman living a simple life, the truth was very different. She carried inside her a lifetime of melodies. Each note was tied to a memory, childhood laughter, family struggles, sacrifices, and long nights of practice. Her life might have been silent to others, but within her, there was a symphony waiting to be heard. And one day, by stepping onto that stage, she would let that hidden symphony escape. A lifetime of silence would turn into a moment of unforgettable sound, a moment that no one, not even the people who laughed, could ever forget. As a little girl, she had always been drawn to the sound of music. Whenever a song played on the radio, she would stop whatever she was doing and listen carefully. Her small fingers would tap along on the table, pretending it was a piano. She dreamed of one day sitting in front of a real instrument, letting her fingers dance across the keys. The dream was bright, so bright that she often imagined herself on a big stage, dressed beautifully while the audience clapped for her. When she was about 9 years old, she asked her father if she could take piano lessons. Her father sighed, his face heavy with worry. He explained gently that lessons cost money they did not have. The family already struggled to buy school books and pay rent. A piano teacher was a luxury far beyond their reach. Her mother, busy folding clothes at the time, added softly, "Music is beautiful, but it cannot put food on the table." She told her daughter to focus on school, to study hard so she could get a good job one day. The little girl nodded, but in her heart she felt disappointment. She didn't give up completely, though. Instead, she found ways to teach herself. Sometimes she would sneak into the community center where an old piano sat in the corner. It was dusty and some keys were out of tune. But to her, it was magic. She would spend hours pressing each note, trying to remember the sounds, copying simple melodies she had heard. Even when the caretaker shooed her away, she would return the next day, hoping for just a few minutes with the instrument. At home, she practiced on anything she could find. She lined up sticks on the floor and pretended they were piano keys. Tapping rhythms with her fingers, she hummed tunes as she played her imaginary instrument. To anyone else, it might have looked silly, but for her, it was practice. It was the only way she could keep her dream alive. As she grew older, her desire to learn only deepened. She borrowed music books from the library. Even though she could barely understand the notes at first, she traced the symbols with her finger, slowly teaching herself. When she finally saved enough money to buy a cheap, second-hand keyboard, it was like a dream come true. The keys were plastic and some of them stuck when pressed, but she loved it as if it were the finest grand piano. But life didn't slow down for her. School demanded her attention. And later, work consumed most of her time. She found herself taking on small jobs to support her family, helping her parents and siblings whenever they needed her. Her own dreams slipped further into the background. She told herself she would return to them someday, but that someday kept moving farther away. There were moments when she almost let go completely. Once, after a long week of work, she sat by her broken keyboard and thought, "What is the use?" Nobody believed in her. Nobody was waiting to hear her play. She could spend her life learning and it still wouldn't matter. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but just as she was about to walk away, she pressed one key. The sound was simple, almost too soft to notice, yet it stirred something inside her. That single note reminded her why she loved music in the first place. She realized that music didn't need an audience. It didn't need applause, it was hers, her secret friend, her comfort during loneliness, even if she never stood on a stage. The piano was still a part of her. Still, deep inside, the dream never fully died. She continued to imagine herself performing one day, maybe in a small hall, maybe just for a handful of people, but enough to prove to herself that she could do it. Her early lessons were not from teachers, but from experience. Every mistake she made became part of her journey. Every wrong note taught her patience. Every small success gave her courage. She learned slowly, clumsily at times, but always with passion, even without formal training. Her music grew more expressive. It carried her feelings, her sadness, her hope, her longing. Yet with each passing year, she felt the distance between her dream and her reality grow wider. Friends her age were moving ahead, studying in universities, getting proper training. Some of them even performed on real stages. She watched quietly, clapping for them, smiling. But inside she felt a sting. It could have been her. If only life had given her the same chance. Still, she never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, she accepted her fate with quiet strength. If she could not have the glamorous path, she would still hold on to her private one. Her piano might be small and imperfect, but it was enough to keep her dream breathing. Looking back, she sometimes wondered how different her life could have been if she had received lessons as a child. Maybe she would have been famous. Maybe she would have played in big concert halls. But she also realized something important. Because she had fought for every note, every chord, her bond with music was deeper than most. It wasn't just training, it was survival. Her piano was not only an instrument, it was a diary, a way of speaking the words she could never say. So while her early dreams seemed to fade, they never truly disappeared. They lingered quietly, waiting for the right moment. A moment when the world would finally hear the music she had carried inside all her life. When she first saw the notice about the community recital, she almost walked past it without a second glance. It was just a simple paper pinned to the board at the library. The letters were bold, announcing a chance for anyone to perform. The recital was open to all ages, free of cost, and the piano would be provided. She stood there for a long time, reading the words again and again. Her heart beat faster, but at the same time her hands grew cold. A small voice inside her whispered, "This is your chance," but another voice argued back, "You are too old, you are not trained, people will laugh." She walked out of the library that day without writing her name down. Yet the notice stayed in her mind, every word echoing inside her as she went about her daily routine. That night, while sitting in front of her little keyboard, she imagined herself on that stage. She imagined the lights, the audience, the silence before the first note. The thought made her both excited and terrified. Could she really stand in front of strangers and play, exposing the music she had guarded so closely all her life? What if her hands shook? What if she made mistakes? What if people laughed at her the next day? She went back to the library just to see if the notice was still there. It was, fluttering slightly as the door opened and closed. A pen was hanging from the board with a piece of string. Her eyes scanned the list of names already written. Most of them were young students from the local music school. Some were children, some teenagers, all preparing to shine. Her heart sank a little. She imagined herself in the middle of them, the odd one out. But then she thought about all the nights she had spent practicing, all the times she had dreamed of performing just once. Her hand lifted slowly, trembling as she reached for the pen. She hesitated, biting her lip, looking around to see if anyone was watching. Finally, she wrote her name. The letters looked small and shaky compared to the bold handwriting of others, but it was enough. As soon as she finished, she felt a strange rush in her chest, fear mixed with relief. She had done it over the following weeks. Her life changed after work. Instead of simply playing whatever came to mind, she began practicing with a clear goal. She chose a piece that had always meant something to her, one that carried both beauty and sadness. It was not too complicated, but not too simple either. It was a piece that told her story without words. She practiced until her fingers ached, until her back hurt from sitting too long. She practiced late into the night, whispering to herself, "Don't give up. You must be ready." Still, doubt never left her. Sometimes, while walking home, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Perhaps the recital was not meant for people like her. Perhaps it was meant only for bright young students who had trained properly. She imagined the audience's reaction, their surprise, their giggles, and her face grew hot just thinking about it. But then she would sit at her keyboard again, press the first note, and remember why she signed up. It wasn't about them, not really. It was about proving to herself that her dream still mattered. It was about showing her younger self, the little girl who once tapped tables pretending they were piano keys, that she had not been forgotten. On the day of the recital, she almost backed out. Her clothes were laid out neatly on the bed, but her stomach churned with fear. She thought of calling the organizers to cancel, telling them she was unwell, but something stronger than fear pushed her forward. She told herself that even if people laughed, even if she made mistakes, she would not let her dream slip away again. She arrived early, sitting quietly in the corner as the young performers bustled around. Some carried sheet music, some whispered nervously to each other. Parents offered encouragement, teachers gave last-minute advice. She had no one beside her, only her own determination. She folded her hands tightly, waiting for her turn. Her heart raced every time another name was called, the sound of clapping and polite cheers filling the hall. When the announcer finally spoke her name, her breath caught in her throat. She stood slowly, her knees weak, and made her way toward the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last. The lights were bright, the audience was large, and every eye seemed fixed on her. She could hear a ripple of whispers, a few muffled laughs, but she did not turn back. She walked steadily, though her hands trembled. And when she reached the piano, she sat down gently. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on her lap for a moment, and closed her eyes. In that instant, she reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't performing for applause or recognition. She was performing for the little girl who once dreamed, for the woman who had kept music alive in silence. For herself, it was a risky decision, perhaps the riskiest she had ever made, but it was also the bravest. For the first time in her life, she was ready to let the world hear what had always been hidden inside her heart. The hall was filled with polite clapping as the performer before her left the stage. She rose slowly when her name was called. her legs feeling heavy as if the floor itself wanted to hold her back. Step by step, she walked toward the piano. Each tap of her old shoes echoed in the silence, reminding her that every single eye in the room was on her. The light seemed brighter than before. Almost blinding, she tried to keep her head up, but she could already hear the whispers beginning. A little cough from somewhere in the back was followed by a faint laugh, then another, sharper this time. She could feel it like a pin in her skin. The laughter wasn't loud, but it spread quickly. A few people smirked. Others nudged the person beside them. She knew exactly what they were thinking. They were not expecting a woman her age, in her simple dress, to sit down at a piano meant for shining young talents. She adjusted the piano bench carefully, trying not to let her nervousness show, but inside, her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. She tried to breathe slowly, deeply, but the sound of the audience lingered. Every little giggle and whisper felt magnified in her ears. She pressed her lips together tightly, refusing to let the tears come. She reminded herself that this was not the first time people had underestimated her. Life had always been like this. People looking at her and seeing only an ordinary, quiet woman. They did not know her struggles, her sacrifices, or her passion. They saw only the surface, and they judged it quickly. That night in the hall was no different. She could hear a group of teenagers in the second row whispering, one of them covering their mouth to hide a laugh. She caught sight of an older man shaking his head slowly as if to say, "This will be a waste of time." The sting of humiliation burned in her chest. She gripped the edge of the bench for a moment, steadying herself. A thought flashed through her mind. Maybe I should stand up and walk away, spare myself the shame, but another thought followed quickly, stronger than the first. No, I did not come all this way to run. She had faced worse in life, harder battles than this. Nights of hunger, days of endless work, years of dreams left waiting. If she could survive all of that, she could survive a few whispers and laughs. Still, the laughter continued. A small child even pointed at her, tugging at his mother's sleeve. The mother smiled awkwardly but didn't stop him. She lowered her gaze, not wanting to meet anyone's eyes. Instead, she looked at the piano keys. They seemed to shine under the stage light, like an old friend waiting patiently. Unlike the crowd, the piano did not laugh. It did not judge. It was ready to listen, ready to let her speak through music. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, not touching them yet. She knew the audience was expecting her to fail. They were waiting for a clumsy mistake, a sour note that would confirm their doubts. That was why some of them laughed. It was easier to mock than to believe. The hall was heavy with their judgment, but she told herself she would not let it crush her. She thought back to the nights when she had practiced alone, playing quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. She thought of the tears she had shed when she could not afford lessons, of the moments she nearly gave up. She thought of the little girl she had once been, tracing imaginary piano keys on the table, dreaming of one day being heard. That girl was still inside her, waiting for this very moment. She straightened her back and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The laughter was still there, faint but sharp, but she shut it out. She let the noise fade into the background, focusing only on the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Her breath came slower now, steadier for the audience. It was still a joke. They exchanged glances, some raising eyebrows. Others sighed as if they were about to endure a long and painful performance. A few leaned back in their chairs, prepared to be unimpressed. But she knew something they didn't. She knew that within her lay years of unspoken emotions, hidden in the quiet corners of her life. She knew that when she played, every note would carry those emotions, and once the music began, the laughter would not last. In that pause before the first sound, the hall was split between two worlds. The audience still sat in their disbelief, some smirking, some pitying, but she sat in silence, ready to cross into a different world, one where music had power and voices no longer mattered. She pressed her first key just to test, but even that single sound made the hall grow a little quieter. For a moment she almost smiled. The piano was on her side. It was ready to speak for her. The laughter, though it still lingered in her ears, no longer had the strength to break her. The moment of ridicule had reached its peak, but deep inside she knew something else was coming. The same people who laughed at her entrance would soon feel something they had not expected, because once the music began, everything would change. Her fingers rested on the keys, light as a feather. For a moment she did not move. The room was still filled with little whispers, but she let them fade into the distance. She closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath, and then, with all the courage she had gathered inside, she pressed the first note. The sound was soft, almost fragile. It floated into the hall like a small voice speaking for the very first time. The audience leaned slightly forward, curious. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago grew quiet, as if people were not sure what to expect. Her hands moved slowly, playing the opening notes with care. Each touch was gentle. But behind that gentleness there was something else. Years of practice. Years of feeling, years of pain. At first, she was nervous, her fingers stiff. But as the melody unfolded, something inside her unlocked. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a friend, a partner. Together they carried her story. She played the notes as if she was telling secrets she had never dared to speak aloud. Secrets of her childhood dreams, of her disappointments, of her long nights alone. The music grew stronger, flowing from her fingertips like water breaking free from a dam. Every note was filled with her heart. She remembered how she used to hum these same tunes quietly while cleaning offices late at night. She remembered how she played softly at home, even when her fingers were tired from working all day, and now on that stage. All of those hidden moments rose up and spilled into the open. The audience, who had been so ready to laugh, sat in silence. They had expected clumsy mistakes, but instead, they were met with something pure, something honest. Her playing was not perfect in the way trained pianists might be perfect, but it had something else. Soul. Every chord carried emotion and every pause held meaning. She began to forget the people in front of her. She no longer felt their stares. She was no longer in the hall at all. She was back in her small apartment playing late at night. She was back in the community center. Pressing the old dusty keys, she was back in her childhood. Tapping imaginary pianos on tables, she had left the stage behind and entered her own world, a world of music. But the audience was still there, and they were changing. Slowly, the whispers stopped completely. The smirks faded from faces instead. Eyes softened. Some leaned forward without realizing. Pulled in by the emotion in her music, the hall, which had been restless and filled with judgment, became still. The sound of her piano wrapped around them like a blanket. She played through her fear, through her doubt, letting the music guide her. The nervousness that had shaken her hands before was gone. Now her fingers moved with confidence, gliding from one key to the next. Sometimes the notes were soft, like a gentle whisper. Other times they rose strong and powerful. Like a cry from the heart, she gave the piano everything she had, every feeling she had carried in silence for years. One part of the piece was especially dear to her. It was the part she had practiced the most, the part that always made her chest ache when she played it alone. When she reached that section, she pressed the keys with more force, pouring her pain into the sound. Her mind filled with memories, the times she had been ignored, the times she had been laughed at, the sacrifices she had made for her family, the dreams she had put aside. All of it came out through the music. People in the hall felt it, even if they didn't know her story. The melody touched something inside them. It reminded them of their own struggles, their own disappointments, their own hidden dreams. That is why the music felt so powerful. It was not just hers anymore, it belonged to everyone listening. She continued to play, her eyes still closed. She did not need to look at the keys. Her fingers knew them by heart. The room was silent except for the piano. The same audience that had laughed when she walked in was now completely still, caught by her performance, and then, slowly, her music began to soften again, like a storm settling into calm. Her fingers moved delicately as if each note was a goodbye. She knew she was reaching the end of the piece. Her heart beat hard in her chest, but this time it was not fear. It was freedom. She had done it. She had spoken the truth of her life without saying a single word. The last notes lingered in the air, gentle, fading. They hung in the silence like a final whisper. For a moment no one moved, the hall was frozen, caught between the memory of laughter and the reality of what they had just heard. She lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest on her lap. Her eyes opened slowly and she looked out at the audience. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. She had given them everything. She had left her soul on the piano. And in that quiet moment she realized something. It didn't matter anymore if they clapped or not. It didn't matter if they approved. What mattered was that she had played, truly played with all her heart. She had faced the whispers, the laughter, and the doubt, and she had answered with music. The last note still floated in the air when she lifted her fingers from the keys. For a moment the hall was frozen in silence. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, not empty, but full of emotions no one could put into words. She sat there, her heart pounding, her chest rising and falling with every deep breath. She did not dare look at the crowd. She stared at the piano instead, her faithful companion, her only shield, and then it happened. A sound rose from the back row, not laughter this time, but something soft. It was a sniff, a shaky breath trying to hold back tears. Another followed, and another. She raised her eyes slowly, unsure if she was imagining it. The same people who had laughed at her entrance were now wiping their eyes. Their faces had changed, no longer amused, no longer doubtful. They were moved, deeply moved. Her music had spoken where words could not. It had reached into the hearts of strangers and touched something tender. The teenagers in the second row, who had whispered and giggled before, now sat with wide eyes, their expression serious. One of them even lowered his head, ashamed of the way he had mocked her earlier. A woman near the front dabbed her cheeks with a tissue. Unable to stop the tears, the melody she had played was more than just notes. It was her life, her struggles, her hidden dreams, and the audience had felt every piece of it. They may not have known her story, but they recognized the truth inside the music. It reminded them of their own pain, their own sacrifices, their own unspoken longings. That was why it made them cry, because in her music, they saw themselves as the last sound faded completely. The silence grew even heavier. It was almost uncomfortable, as if everyone was holding their breath. She lowered her hands to her lap and sat still, unsure what would happen next. Would they clap politely, the way audiences sometimes do when they don't know how to react? Or would they remain silent, not knowing what to say? And then suddenly the silence broke. A pair of hands began to clap, strong and steady. Then another joined, and another, until the entire hall erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, filling the room. It was not polite clapping, not the kind people give out of obligation. It was real, full of respect, admiration, and something deeper. She blinked rapidly, her eyes stinging with tears. For years she had played in silence, with no one to hear. Now here she was on a stage, and people were not laughing anymore. They were clapping, cheering, standing. Some even shouted "Bravo" as their hands came together again and again. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, and gave a small bow. Her vision blurred from the tears she could no longer hold back. She had expected humiliation, but instead, she had found something she never thought she would feel: acceptance for the first time in her life. Her music had been heard, truly heard, in the crowd. She noticed an older man wiping his eyes. He had been one of the people who had shaken his head earlier, dismissing her before she began. Now he clapped harder than anyone. A young mother hugged her child tightly, whispering something in his ear, perhaps telling him to remember this moment. A group of students who had been ready to mock her were now on their feet. Applauding with sincerity, the hall was transformed. The same space that had once echoed with laughter now rang with respect. The same eyes that had judged her now shone with admiration, and the same mouths that had whispered doubt were silent, humbled by the truth her music had revealed. She stood there, overwhelmed. Her hands still tingled from the playing. Her heart still beat with the rhythm of the song. The applause washed over her like a wave. It was almost too much, too powerful. She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. The truth was, she had not played for them. She had played for herself, to prove that her dream had not died. But in doing so, she had given the audience a gift they never expected. She had reminded them that talent is not about appearance, or age, or wealth. True talent comes from the heart, from the courage to speak through music even when the world doubts you. Tears streamed down her face now, but she did not hide them. She let the audience see her, not as a polished performer, but as a human being who had finally found her voice. They clapped louder, some stamping their feet, as if to tell her that she was not invisible anymore. She bowed again, her heart overflowing. For years, she had lived in silence, carrying her music alone. But in this one moment, the silence had broken. The world had heard her, and the world had answered, not with laughter, but with tears and thunderous applause.